manufacturing, and then to go towards import substitution and export-led growth phases, and eventually reaching a knowledge-based economy. The second dimension is constitutionalism, political governance, and national institutions also transform and mature along this journey. Can we? Yes. The third dimension. The third dimension is that there has to be some sort of an intergenerational commitment to economic transformation. This requires a broad-based national political consensus to overcome resistance to reform agenda at various phases of the journey. To have a national buy-in, you have to have an inbuilt system of where the fruits of growth are distributed in a just manner so that there is an inclusion in the development process. The third element is the building of national capacities to identify what are the growth sectors and how they can be used to finance economic transformation for the next stage. And the last and the most important is that the savings of one generation are transferred to the next to finance the implementation of the various phases of the growth or economic transformation. God, I press this, it doesn't work. Right. Now I come to to having understood what is meant by the economic transformation. I now move to my second part of the presentation. What are the major socioeconomic features of Saudi Arabia? Sorry, let's jump. The previous one, please. Yes. Saudi Arabia has a per capita income of about $20,500 in 2016 and is a high-income member country of the IDB group. It is the 19th largest economy in the world, and it is a member of the G20 Intergovernmental Forum. Saudi Arabia is classified by the Human Development Report of 2016 as a very high human development country. Now, at this stage, please note that Saudi Arabia has already achieved a very high human development status. It is already a high-income member country. And as we will see, collapsed. Even the socioeconomic outcomes are really up at the level of very high-income human development category. Now, what are the reasons for Saudi Arabia to embark on Vision 2030 and the economic transformation agenda? Sorry, keep jumping around. Now, last year was a Can I move to the next slide, please? Yes. Last year, 2016, was a watershed year for Saudi Arabia. It launched Vision 2030, and it has three major categories: vibrant society, thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. And in the first phase of implementing the Vision 2030, it is underpinned by three medium-term programs: Fiscal Balance Program 2020, National Transformation Program 2020, and governance reforms. Also, living in Saudi Arabia, I can assure you that the Saudi leadership has very strong commitment to implementing these transformative programs. Now, I move to the next stage of describing that, what led to this adoption of a very ambitious transformative program. If we look at a long history from 1971 till now, what we have observed that over the past 45 years, Saudi Arabia has achieved remarkable success in both achieving economic transformation and building a dominant role for the private sector activities. In fact, the private sector over these 45 years has shown remarkable resilience whenever the oil output has decreased or has decreased or gone into a negative phase. So the private sector in Saudi Arabia has been resilient to the volatility in the oil output. However, in recent years, what we have observed is that the sharp swings in overall economic growth in Saudi Arabia was mainly driven by the volatility in the oil and gas output, yet the non-oil GDP growth has remained resilient to this volatility. The main major vulnerability of the Saudi Arabia is on the fiscal side. If we see, for example, 2015 and 2016, the fiscal balance was about 16% of the GDP in 2015 and was about 13% in 2016. Now, in the medium term, it has become imperative for Saudi Arabian authorities to achieve fiscal consolidation or budgetary balance, and this will entail a difficult adjustment process in the economy, but it is necessary to lay the foundation for private sector-led revival growth in the non-oil sector. The other vulnerability is the external sector vulnerability, where about 75 to 80% of the GDP consists of oil and related export products. So to make an overall sense of what has happened in the last few years is that the output side of the Saudi economy is well diversified. It has a strong and resilient private sector, but on the aggregate demand side, the fiscal vulnerabilities or weaknesses, which is mainly driven by the oil revenues, has or adversely impacted the aggregate demand side. Now, can we go back? Yes. One of the major reasons for Saudi authorities to embark on a transformative program is related to the fact that looking ahead 2030, 2050, the overall global demand for liquid hydrocarbons will peak around 2030, and the growth will decelerate to about 0.7% through to 2050. The second major vulnerability or requirement for launching this transformative program is that there's a need to correct the fundamental imbalances in the government's balance sheet. And the third major reason for Saudi Arabia to embark on a transformative program is very low productivity in the Saudi economy. McKinsey recently calculated that the average annual productivity growth of the Saudi Arabia during 2003 to 2013 was 0.8%, which is way below or way behind China at 9.6%, India 5.6%, and even Nigeria 4.3%. However, the positive point is that the non-oil private sector productivity growth for the same period was 2.5%. So basically it was the public sector which was pulling down the overall productivity growth. Looking ahead, these transformative programs, which has been articulated in the Fiscal Balance Program and the National Transformation Program, are really geared to addressing the productivity challenge and to bring it up to a level where these lead to a transformation of the economy. Now I'm approaching my third part of the, can we go back please? Yes. To describe the architecture of the Saudi Vision 2030. I have been in the business of development field for almost 25 to 30 years, and I've yet to see a revolutionary, radical, transformative program as Saudi Arabia has adopted now. Like I said earlier, it has three components. The first one is vibrant society. And very few transformative programs recognize upfront the key challenges in the social sector, in the economy sector, in the governance areas. And this Saudi Vision 2030 addresses all these dimensions. For example, if you see vibrant society with fulfilling lives, promoting culture and entertainment, living healthy and being healthy. And there are specific targets against all of these. I think during our conversation after this presentation, we can talk about what are those specific targets. Caring for our families, developing children's characters, these are all issues that Saudi Arabia faces. And the leadership has recognized upfront. They have set up programs, they have allocated budgets, and they have embarked on a transformation of the society, of the social sector, of the economy, and of the governance. Can we move to the next, please? Yes. Okay, I can skip the. On the governance area, I think the new buzzword in Saudi Arabia is transparency, responsibility, and accountability, and inculcating values where the members of the society are responsible for their own well-being, to wean them away from dependency on the Saudi subsidies or transfers, being responsible to and contributing to the society through charity. Next, please. Yes. Now, like I said earlier, under the Saudi Vision 2030, there are three major programs. Here I'm only going to talk about the two of them: the reform agenda under Fiscal Balance 2020, which is basically the major fundamental reasons why the Saudi Arabia has embarked on this transformative program. There are three major elements. The first one is to diversify non-oil revenues. The second is measures to optimize government expenditures and to control overshooting of the budget, both on the operational and at the capital expenditure side. And then a private sector stimulus package designed to do import substitution industrialization in Saudi Arabia. I think this is something which they have never tried before, and it is now that they are going to launch a build-up of local capacities and local manufacturing sector. Next, please. The one before, please. Yes. The second major, no, the next after one. Yes. The second major, the medium-term program is the National Transformation Program. Now, this National Transformation Program is very elaborate. It is basically aimed at productivity transformation in the public sector, and it seeks to create jobs of up to 450,000 by 2020, and seeks private sector partnership, maximizing the local value added, and there are 5 common digital platforms which will then support the e-government business in Saudi Arabia. Now, as a host country and as a very strong, next please. The bank has been engaged in what we call member country partnership strategy with the Saudi government. We started a journey about late last year, and there was sort of formal consultation which was started in October, and then a high-level delegation led by His Excellency the President led a mission to meet with selected line ministries, and a number of executive and technical consultations were held. We are in the process of completing the engagement process with the Saudi authorities, and basically our engagement would be in 3 major areas. The first one would be advisory work related to the development of the public-private partnerships. The second is to assist various programs under the National Transformation Program to mobilize resources and to support private sector investment activities, and then selectively assist various national institutions in building capacities, training programs, and connecting them with the centers of excellence. With this last slide, I thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for that update. All right, our next speaker for the afternoon is the advisor to the General Manager at the Delivery and Rapid Intervention Center. Let's give him, please, a very big warm welcome. Dr. Rabi Kansari, please, to the stage.
Let's make sure that the clicker is working. If you can see the slides. Okay, first of all, I would like to say that I'm really privileged and honored to share the stage with giants like His Excellency Idris Jala and Lee Sandals and others. Actually, as a matter of fact, during the last month, we had conducted visits to Malaysia and the UK to actually learn from their experiences in driving the delivery of Vision 2030. So if you can have the slides so we can start, please. So today's talk is going to be about Vision 2030 delivery, the journey, and what are some of the challenges and the lessons learned from the last year, and what is our aspirations that we are going to talk about. But let's wait until the slides come up on the screen. So maybe we have some technical difficulties now. Okay. Oh, so now we have to actually make some rapid intervention. So okay, finally. So now we have the slides online. Okay. So the clicker is not working. Okay. So I'm going to talk about 4 points. The first, you know what? I'm going to make it manual. So I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide. I will not do anything from here, okay? So maybe that will be better. So we're going to talk about 4 main points. We're going to talk about the context of the vision, and Dr. Ahmed before me actually laid a very good background. So I will go very quickly on this element. Then I'm going to talk about our journey so far. If you want to talk about Malaysia and the UK, you're going to hear about success stories. However, I'm going to talk to you about our journey, because we are still on an ongoing journey with the vision for the kingdom to go to the transformation. So we're going to talk about this journey, what are the challenges that we are facing, what are some of the success that we accomplished during the last year, and that's our third element, the lessons and challenges. And then we're going to talk about what's next for Vision 2030. So can we go to the next slide, please? Next. Okay, so now we have a hiccup. Okay, next. Sorry? Sorry? It's a PDF, yes. Next, okay. So as Dr. Ahmed explained, the vision is based on actually 3, we'd call it them themes: a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. And when King Salman assumed the throne like 2 years ago, he said, like, my first objective is for our country to be pioneering and successful global model of excellence on all fronts. And I will work with you to achieve that. And after that, there was a lot of transformational effort in order to come up with the vision. And the vision is based on 3 pillars, which are the competitive advantage of Saudi Arabia. So can we go to the next slide, please? And these 3 pillars is that Saudi Arabia is the heart of the Arab and Islamic world, and it is an investment powerhouse, and it's a hub because it's connecting 3 continents. So these are the 3 unique competitive advantage that these 3 themes constitute the vision structure as explained by Dr. Muhammad in the speech before me. Can we go to the next one, please? And recently, like 2 weeks ago, there was a launch of the vision realization programs. So the government announced 12 programs, and one of which is the National Transformation Program, which was launched last year. But actually, 2 weeks ago, they launched 12 programs, 2 of which already have been launched last year, the National Transformation Program and the Fiscal Balance Program that my colleague, he actually talked about them. I'm going to go and zoom a little bit on the National Transformation Program to tell you a little bit of context and background. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next. Okay. So the very first effort that came after the aspiration from the government to basically have a vision and have a transformation within the government is actually they created a lot of units within the center of government. One of the units was the delivery unit, and the name was a delivery unit as a unit. Then it was transformed into a center, which is the Delivery and Rapid Intervention Center. There is a lot of people, there was some misalignment between the Arabic name and the English name, because the English name continued to be the delivery unit, but the Arabic name changed. It was وحدة الإنجاز, then it was changed to مركز الإنجاز وتدخل السريع. But the English name remained, so now we have to do like a rebranding a little bit to have it the accurate translation with it, which is Delivery and Rapid Intervention Center. And the mandate of that unit, when it was established, is basically to accelerate delivery on high-impact socio-economic initiatives and programs. And in order to accelerate delivery, you need to have high-impact socio-economic initiatives and programs. And that was not the case. We're talking about the end of 2015. So our support model in the delivery and rapid intervention, or the delivery unit at that time, is shaping how we can come about these high-impact socio-economic initiatives and programs. And there we started what we call the labs, which we learned actually from the Malaysian model, the PMANDO model. And in that labs, we had like a building, and we had every day 1,000 people coming every day to basically discuss and collaborate on creating initiatives and programs to transform the nation. And that was our part of supporting in the shaping of this transformation. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what kinds of enablement we did, and then what we were going to do next, which is accelerating delivery. So can we go to the next slide, please? So now I'm going to talk about our journey so far. So I talked about the shaping part. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the vision was announced in April of last year. Then the National Transformation Program was announced, and then lately the Fiscal Balance Program, and just recently, 2 weeks ago, the Vision Realization Programs. And the full Vision Realization Program launch will be in August of 2017 as planned. But we have the National Transformation Program, which is the biggest program of the vision. So can we go to the next slide? And this is how it started. It started, as I told you, in labs. We had every day, like the total unique participants in these labs exceeded 3,000 government employees. Every day they have 1,000 people coming at the same, like coming to this building and coming from 8 in the morning and staying all the way up to 9 at night, which is not very usual for government employees. We have government employees, they usually leave like by 2 p.m., if not noon, they just leave and they finish their work. So having this mentality, this change was a great outcome from these labs, from these NTP labs. And can you go to the next slide, please? Another element that also my colleague touched on is the accountability. And in these labs, the ministers themselves were coming and driving actually the momentum of the employees to basically drive the change and have actually the momentum going, and the way of thinking. The government way of thinking is being changed and transformed. So they actually were coming themselves and interacting with all of their employees at the labs. Can we go to the next slide, please? So let's talk about the key outcome of this exercise. There's a lot of exercises that happened during the last year, but I want to focus on the National Transformation Program because, in our opinion, this is the cornerstone of the program and it actually created a lot of momentum. So the first key outcome is the government momentum to transformation. You can see that now everybody, like if you go to the ministries, especially those who are working on the vision, you can see that the momentum is going. They are staying all the way up at night, and now they are speaking a new language. Now everybody is talking about performance, KPIs. We need to achieve these targets. We need to make change. We need to make impact to the citizens. So this is the second outcome. And the third outcome is accountability and transparency. Now everybody is accountable. Like even when we talk about the ministers, now a ministerial position is actually a stressful job because there is accountability that ministers have to be accountable to their KPTs and KPIs, and now everybody is on the hook to deliver these promises that they make. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges. Can you go to the next slide, please? And lessons learned. It's working? Okay. So the very first lesson is every context is different. Our context is different than the Malaysian context, is different than the UK context. There is not one formula for success. Success has many formulas. And in the context of Saudi Arabia, we have a different culture. We have a different political structure. We have a different kinds of doing business. So we are now learning. Like throughout the last year, we have been through a lot of challenges and a lot of lessons learned. And we actually, a lot of these things, we acted upon. So, and this comes to the second challenge, which is capability building. One of the major things that we face is that government employees need a lot of capability building and capacity. And actually, one of the center of government entities, ADA, and we have the Human Capital Center, were mandated to basically build the capacity within government entities. And they have a KPT of training 10,000 government employees. Today I was talking to one of my colleagues at ADA, and they told me that they certified 1,500 government employees on performance management. And they are actually wanted to do more on project management and all of these soft skills in order to deliver the vision. And the last or the third lesson learned is that change is a process and not an event. During the last year, we changed a lot. We actually did a lot of things. Some of them were correct and we are continue doing. And we actually, there is a lot of lessons learned that we are adapting to basically co-opt with these challenges that we are faced, and we are changing. Every time we try something and it doesn't work, we try again. We try something new in order to deliver what we are promising the nation. And that brings me to what is next. As I told you at the beginning, last month we had a visit to Pemandu in Malaysia and to the implementation unit at UK, and we actually visited a couple of agencies to learn how they are delivering on transformations such as ours. And this is the part where we are now switching gears into delivery. If I want to talk about last year, it was mostly 90% planning, okay? 90% changing how people work and how people communicate and talk in the government. We are changing how people do business, government, how they do business. There was, I would say 10% of accelerating delivery. There has been a lot of things that has been delivered in the government transformation. There are some citizen impact, like one of the things is challenging some of the cultural taboos. So via, for example, the General Entertainment Authority. Like now they have more than 500 events, and every weekend there are a lot of events that people can go into. This was a cultural taboo before the vision. So this is one of the outcomes that is touching the citizen. And there are actually some obstacles that have been removed in terms of budgeting for the entities. So there are some outcomes touching mostly the government in terms of transformation. And this year, we are actually switching gears into delivery to impact the citizen. And we have a strong drive to deliver this by the end of this year and the following years until we achieve the vision. So by this, I would like to end my speech. Thank you very much.
Now, thank you, Dr. Rami. I have a number of questions for you, but I'll wait for our panel discussion. All right, next up, he is the Chief Executive of Delivery Associates. He's the ex-member of the UK Prime Minister's Delivery Unit. Can I get a huge round of applause, please, for Mr. Lee Sandel to the stage?
Great, thank you. So it's a great honour to be here with you today, and I'm going to share some of my experiences from working within a delivery unit myself, but also since then supporting governments around the world, like in Brunei Darussalam, Egypt, the Punjab region of Pakistan, who have attempted to apply this delivery approach to transform outcomes for their citizens. So I'm going to share some of my experiences, but I'm conscious also that you're all delivery experts yourself who have delivered transformation, and therefore I look forward to hearing your own stories and impact as well. So I'm going to focus on the how of transformation. The what is very important. You've got to be clear what it is you want to achieve. But our experience is that unless you get the how right, you won't transform outcomes for citizens. So what do I mean by this? First slide, please. So when you think about the what and the how, the what is often the policy idea, and then the how is the actual implementation. So how you actually implement that idea in order to transform outcomes. Can you just click it on one, please? What we typically see around the world is that governments spend too much time thinking about the what, the idea, and not enough time thinking about the how, and the how you actually implement it. And then often what you find is that there's a very good idea, but when you actually go to implement it, you discover all sorts of things that you never knew when you were designing the policy. And typically we think governments spend too much time, about 90% of their time on the what, and only about 10% of their time on the actual implementation, the how. What do you think those numbers should be if you're really focused on the how of implementation? 60-40, okay, yeah. So you change the balance of them a bit to spend more time on the how. 80-20, okay, yeah. So from our experience, can you just click it on one, please? No, move it on, please. Can you click it on, please? Yeah. So from our experience, this is quite extreme, but we think it should be the other way around. So we think that when you succeed with transformation, you get the what good enough, but then you actually get going with the implementation. And it's only when you get going with the actual implementation yourself that you start to learn about how effective the policy is. So it's only when people start implementing it out there on the front line that you really learn what works, what doesn't work. You start discovering some of the perverse behaviors, if you like, or some of the incentives that you never thought about when you were designing the policy. That's when you really learn about them. And what you also find is that there are fantastic people who will take your idea, they'll innovate and make it even better than the way you designed it. But you'll only get onto that if you get going with the implementation quite quickly. I saw this myself when I was in the UK Prime Minister's Delivery Unit, where the Education Department had an objective to reduce unauthorised absence in schools. So that was their policy, reduce unauthorised absence in schools. They started implementing it, unauthorised absence started coming down. Everyone thought it was a great success. What do you think was happening in schools to help achieve that target of reducing unauthorised absence? Huh? Collusion. Head teachers were authorising absence that they shouldn't have. So if you wanted to take your children out of school to go to a family wedding, that shouldn't really be allowed. But head teachers would authorise it because there'd been set a goal to reduce unauthorised absence. What should the target have been? Huh? Yeah, we should have just been measuring presence in school. All absence from school is bad. You want children in school, so all absence is bad. So we changed the goal, changed the strategy, but we only got that by getting on and actually doing the implementation. Years of planning never foresaw actually how behavior would change when you started implementing the goal. And it's human nature that some people will respond to the targets and they might game it, or they might, do things to achieve the goal but to miss the point. So really getting going with the how is when you really start to learn about the policy, and we encourage right from the start, get your plan good enough, but then get going with the actual implementation. That's when you'll really learn. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then what do we mean by the how? So we would encourage you to keep the how really, really simple. Some transformations can get quite overcomplicated in terms of the language that's used, the method, the approach. We would encourage you to keep the how really simple. And if you can answer these 5 basic questions, then you'll be well set for delivering transformation. So the first one's really key. What are we trying to achieve? So you've got to be clear on that vision, but within it, you've got to have a tight focus. Too many transformations have hundreds and hundreds of priorities, and it's impossible to deliver so many things. So having a real focus on the things that will make the biggest difference to your vision, to transforming outcomes for citizens, that's really key. Until you've got that clarity, it's very hard to deliver anything. Second question then, how are you going to do it? And people often talk about a plan, and within that plan there'll be different sections, but you have a plan. And then for us, the key question is the third one. At any given moment, how will you know whether that plan is working? So when you're implementing your plan and you're out there in the system, how will you know whether it's having the desired impact? How will you know if it's driving the right behavior change that you thought about? Or how will you know whether it's actually changing slightly perverse behavior that you don't want to happen? So your ability to know what's happening and then to learn from it, which is the key, is really, really important. But of course, once you've got that feedback loop and you know how well implementation's going, then question 4, what are you going to do about it if it's off track? So what are you going to do if that great idea that you had when you start implementing it is not having the desired impact on outcomes, it's not changing people's lives? What are you going to do? And then that's where you need some sort of routine, some governance to learn, to capture the learning, and to solve problems. Not to point fingers and blame, but to say, look, it's not working as we thought. What can we do about it? How can we correct things and get it back on track? And this is very much in real time and iterative. It's not just saying, let's sit back for 6 months and fingers crossed it will be okay. It's about doing it in the moment, learning and changing things as you go. And then as we've seen with ambitious goals like the 2030 vision here, you've got to always be asking, how can we help each other? Because so many of these transformations require multiple stakeholders, people to come together in order to deliver the change. So constantly asking, how can we help each other across government work together is really, really key. So focus on the how, get going quickly, and then keep the how simple. Don't overcomplicate it. If you can answer these 5 questions, you'll be well set up for delivering transformation. Okay, next slide, please. And the how is really hard in practice. So these are some highlights from John Kotter, who's like a change management expert from Harvard. He sets out all of these things that go wrong when you actually start doing the how. And it's really important that you think about them from the outset, and you try and design your plan in a way that addresses them. So the one that we always come across is communication, and underestimating the power of communication. Most governments that we have worked with, when they launch a transformation, would do a big ministerial speech. They would do the press notice and maybe issue some guidance. And they think that's communication. Kotter would say, times that by 10 in terms of frequency of communication, not enough. Times it by 100, still not enough. Times it by 1,000, that's probably just about right. So communicating your vision, your expectations of what everyone's got to do is really, really key. But actually then breaking it down so that if you're working in education, for example, what's your message to a student? How's that different to the message to the parent? How's that different to a message to the teacher? How's that different to the message to the head teacher, to regional government, to the people within the Ministry of Education? Different audiences, different messages, different communications channels. And then think about doing that 1,000 times throughout a year. That is the sort of how that you need to get right if people are going to be committed to your transformation, if they're going to understand it, and if they're going to deliver. So there's a whole bunch of cultural things here that you have to really think about and design them in from the start. Next slide, please. So if you're doing the how, it will look cyclical like this. So you'll start with a plan that's good enough. You will resist the temptation to spend that extra month or 2 months trying to perfect it. You'll get going with the implementation. You'll then learn from the implementation. You'll learn what's working. You'll learn what are the unintended consequences. All those behaviors that you didn't foresee at the beginning that now start playing out in the system. You'll accept there might be some failures, some things that might not work, but you'll also know that some people will innovate. They'll take your plan, they'll make it even better. And you constantly iterate and learn, which is why that question 3 around how will you know is important. You need to know how it's going, how it's being implemented in order to take from that and to learn. A good example of this recently in Brunei Darussalam, where they've been focused heavily on ease of doing business. They were the most improved country on ease of doing business World Bank ranking last year. It used to take 100 days to start a business in Brunei. So most businesses went bust before they even got going. They got it down to about 1 day. But during that journey, they thought they'd made improvements, but people in the system were saying nothing's really changed. So they looked, they tried to learn about delivery, and what they found were there were agents who for years had been profiting from slow bureaucratic government. Those agents had not passed on some of the policy changes. They were still like a middle person in the system helping businesses to set up, but they were now slower than the government. But it's only when you're really in touch with implementation, you're in touch with the system, that you can find out that sort of learning and then correct your policy. So get your plan good enough, get going with implementation, learn quickly, and keep refining your plan. What you don't want is one of these master plans that you spend ages developing, you put it on the shelf, and then you don't look at it. This is a plan that you're using in real time and constantly refining. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, relationships are key for doing the how. So a lot of big transformations come from strong leadership where it's one person's idea, one person's vision. That is really, really important for driving change. But the more you can get other people committed and bought into that agenda, the more likely you are, A, for it to have an impact and also for it to sustain. Too often, what you see is that one person's vision, for whatever reason, that person as a minister maybe changes, and then with them goes the transformation, goes all of the efforts to date. So having that strong leadership, but getting broad sort of coalition of support throughout your delivery chain, not just across government, but in hospitals, in schools, out in the actual public sector, is really, really key if you are going to deliver the transformation, but also sustain it, which is the key thing. You don't want it to go away when there's a change in leadership. Next slide. And then the behaviors, the culture's really right. So a lot of transformation is about how you behave and how you go about it, not just what you do. So the people leading the transformation, whether they're in the delivery unit or the agency themselves, are the ambitious people who believe it can be done. They are the people who say yes, and to the people who say, we've tried that before, it won't work here, we did that, it didn't work. These are the people who convince you to say, yes, it can be done, we believe in change, it's possible. They're also practical though. They actually get things done. They generate early wins. They show you what success looks like so you believe in the change. They help drive a focus. As I've said already, one of the big risks with transformation programs is there's just simply too many initiatives within them. So keeping the focus, being really ruthless in the way that you prioritize, avoiding distractions to keep your mind on the things that will have the biggest difference. Again, that's another important behavior. Having clarity and honesty. So if something's not working, and that policy you spent all these months developing is not working when you actually start doing it, being able to say it's not working rather than let's just give it a bit longer, and because you're too wedded to it, you keep going with it. So being able to be honest and say, it's not working, but this is what we're going to do about it, is a really important behavior. Urgency is key. So with any transformation, you're changing things because you need to, and you can't hang around. So being able to inject pace and urgency into, you often sat in meetings and you hear, we'll come back to you in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks with an action plan or an action. Being the one to challenge that, to say, can we do it quicker? Can we move things quicker? Injecting that pace is really, really key. And then making sure all of this is irreversible. So, as I've said, getting the leadership right, getting the relationships right. You don't want this to fall away if there's a change in leadership or something like that. You want it to be sustainable for the long term. Next slide. So when you've got it right, here are some success factors that you can see. And we see these all around the world in terms of delivery units or governments that have delivered successful transformation. You see that visible commitment from the top, often in a single leader, but ideally in a group of leaders who are really committed to the change. Very hard to deliver transformation without that commitment. You see the focus on a few top priorities, but people keep that focus as well. Don't allow themselves to be distracted. That there is this partnership and collaboration across agencies. It's not just one person driving it in a sort of top-down way. You need this, because a lot of the visions, transformations are broad and require whole government effort, but you also need that commitment and buy-in if they're going to be sustainable. All of this is countercultural, so it is about being different. A lot of the behaviors, the culture, is about saying we're going to do things differently. So I love the example of the lab given earlier, where people stay till late at night with the private sector, public sector, all locked in a room trying to solve a problem. That is countercultural, and that's the way it should feel. Trying to shorten the distance between central government and the front line is also key. It's the people out there in public services who are actually delivering the transformation. So getting closer to understanding what's working, their behaviors, their incentives is really key if you're going to get the how right in terms of how you design this. And avoiding that trap of thinking in central government we know best for the system and that we can design it here. So a great thing about the lab is the fact that it brings everyone together. It shortens the distance between central government and the people at the front line. That's really, really key. And then finally, all of this should be data-driven and objective. And there are those words again that we heard earlier, transparent and accountable. Really, really important. Final slide then. So to summarize, focus more on the how at the start. So important to have the what, but also just factor in more of the how. Keep your approach to the how simple. And keep in mind those 5 questions: what you're going to achieve, how you're going to do it, how you'll know, what you'll do if you're off track, and how can we help. Build and sustain those key relationships. Get your plan good enough, but then start implementing it and learn as you go. And really focus on your behaviors. Because you can take any of the tools or templates that any of us share with you today on the stage, but unless you get the behaviors and the culture right, they won't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions in the panel for you a little bit later. Up next, I'd like to introduce now the Director for Country Programs Department for Asia and Arab from the Islamic Development Bank. Can I get a very big warm of applause for him, please? Mr. Mohammed Jamal Al-Sati, please, to the stage.
Well, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Now, I think the speakers have enlightened us about the journey of transformation of countries, of governments, the challenges, the way forward, and I think everybody touched upon delivery, etc., etc. So I think they made my job easier in introducing the transformation of an institution which is serving member countries. So the presentation that I'll be making on behalf of, again, my colleagues, is about the Islamic Development Bank Group, its transformation also to serve its member country. So let me see, I don't know whether I succeed. I think I am, well, not there. Okay. So anyhow, the presentation will be in 4 parts. The development model of the Islamic Development Bank Group, and I will share with you also something about the vision and the strategy. And then what does the IDB Group want to achieve? It's not just only about, as was mentioned by the speaker, it's not only about just developing the policy and then you get stuck in the implementation. And as a matter of fact, I just came from another meeting where, I'm not sharing a secret, but in the IDB with the new presidency, we're looking into, I would say, maybe transformation of the organization into decentralization, etc., etc. So here, the team has developed the plans, but then we were discussing the implementation. And then we were faced with lots of challenges about how you're going to implement it. And that's, again, a lesson learned. And then I'll be talking about the IDB programming approach. Again, at the end of the day, what we do in IDB is linked to serving our member countries through programs, through plans, etc. And then maybe just moving forward. So first slide, or next slide. Sorry about the slide, but I had difficulty also because it's supposed to be a, what you call it, a animated slide. But anyhow, the story is this, that IDB is supposed to, our logo is together we build a better future for the member countries. So it's all really about serving our member countries in their social and economic development. And as everybody is aware, what's unique about the Islamic Development Bank, it's a South-South cooperation organization, which is also unique that all our 57 member countries, they're both recipients and providers, which is also unique from the other MDBs, where you have what you call providers and recipients. So it's really work as a model of, I would say, solidarity, cooperation among the member countries, where a country can serve another country through different models. So I apologize about the slide, but the story is here that a large number of our member countries lag behind in many of the indexes when it comes to human development indexes, education, health, etc., which really poses a big challenge for the Islamic Development Bank to serve some member countries and transform them from poverty to a better, I would say, living conditions, improving lots of the human development indexes. Next. So, in the journey of the Islamic Development Bank over the 42 plus years of serving the member countries, a few years ago, I think before our 40th anniversary, there was a decision that IDB should evaluate itself. And instead of doing a self-evaluation, we said, let's go to the stakeholders and again to our beneficiaries. So aside from involving a top-notch consulting firm, and nothing wrong about hiring them because they will give you really independent views and all of that. So long journey, but we went to the field and we went to our regions. So we had what we call workshops in the member countries. We had one in Kuala Lumpur, we had one in Jeddah, we had one in Dakar, and we have one also in Almaty in Kazakhstan. And we consulted with our stakeholders, both at the public, private sector, academia, NGOs, about the performance of IDB. And hence, we realize our weaknesses, our strengths, what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, etc., and which form our really vision for the future. And I'm sharing with you here right now this slide, which talks about the vision, I would say new vision or the 10-year strategy. Again, I do apologize that maybe I need my glasses, but because I thought that I will have the screen in front of me, but anyhow. So the vision calls for the strategic objective, which is involving inclusiveness, and we would like to be the preferred, let's say, institution where our member countries should come to. Connectivity, as I mentioned, we're a South-South cooperation, so we'd like to have better connectivity between our member countries. And Islamic financial services growth. We are the Islamic Development Bank, and hence we should be the leader when it comes to Islamic finance. And we're very proud that the whole world right now is talking about Islamic financing as a tool for serving, like development. Now, what are the strategic pillars to achieve the strategy or the vision? We're looking at economic and social infrastructure, so all the types. We're talking about education, health, we're talking about infrastructure, energy, transportation, etc. The development of the private sector, you cannot escape that private sector plays a big role in the development, and there is huge reliance right now on public is pushing more to the private sector. Inclusive social development, cooperation between member countries, and I mentioned that, and Islamic finance sector development. And a cross-cutting, I would say, pillar is capacity development. Everybody's talking about capacity development, knowledge, transfer, institutional capacity, everything that you do. Even if you build a road, there is capacity development. Now, what are the, say, the guiding principles? A few. Resource mobilization. So IDB cannot do it alone. Our resources are limited, whether it's financial or human resources, so definitely resource mobilization is very, very important. I'll go to selectivity. You cannot do everything. Okay, you have to prioritize. You have to be very selective. You have to deal with your partners. You cannot do everything, otherwise you spread too thin. Financial sustainability, very, very important. You have your own resources, but you have to go into other resources, leveraging of balance sheets. I'm talking because we are a financing institution. The synergy, we talk about the IDB group, so it's not only about the IDB, but it's as a group. So we have the private sector, trade, insurance, all of it. So we're going also as a group to provide a basket of services to our member countries. And then building the capacities, I mentioned that, and also looking at the issue of, again, selectivity, etc. And last but not least, managing for results. And I left this one at the end because right now everybody's talking about delivery, everybody's talking about results. Even in our, what we call it, jargon, it used to be all about approval. We approved 5.2 billion, we approved 4 billion, etc., etc. Is it all about approval, or is it about achieving results on the ground? And this is the challenge for every institution right now. So it's all about development effectiveness, also about results. Next. Now, I'll just talk about briefly about some subject that most of you are aware of, is the SDGs, which is, again, the transformation of the world. You know, okay, we had the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goal in 2015, and beyond that, countries got together under the umbrella of the UN, and they established or they developed the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, 169, I would say, targets. So even right now, our 10-year strategy that we're adopting, and here we're talking about alignment and measurable, okay. We are building our, let's say, guiding principles into the SDGs. So for example, without getting into the details, you're looking at economic and social infrastructure. We're looking at the target, the SDGs that are aiming or helping us to achieve our target. So it's I would say it's a two-way. We are contributing to the SDGs at the same time. We are being guided by the SDGs to achieve our target. The same thing applies to inclusive social development. I would say the Islamic financial, you can look at the targets, whether it's about education, whether it's about water, whether it's about gender equality, etc., etc., etc. Next. Next, yeah. Now, here is, again, I'm not expecting everybody to go through the numbers, and we'll be providing you with the slides. But here is the delivery focus, which is, now we look at the 10-year strategy, and again, it's a strategy, and we have the guiding principles, the selectivity, and all that. But how do you achieve it? How do you measure it? Okay, you have to establish to yourself some, I would say, measurable targets, and I would say kind of like a stick. Are you on the right track or not? So here we're looking at the goals, as I mentioned, which is the inclusiveness, the connectivity, and the global Islamic finance being Islamic financing. And here we have set for ourselves target at the beginning of the strategy and moving into the end of the strategy in 2035. So I'll just select again at random. If we're looking at inclusiveness, okay, for example, the population living in near poverty. In 1335, as a target or as a goal, 48%. And again, the number can be challenged. And here in 1425, we're looking again to improve on this by having a target, and this is your challenge to achieve the goal, etc. How are you going to be achieving it? Through results And these are comprehensive human development, cooperation with the member countries I mentioned, Islamic finance as a tool. Now, the performance measures to achieve the goals and the targets are shown in the blue. So here we're looking at operational efficiency. We have to start at what we call it, at the baseline, and then by 2035, we're looking at where are we. We're looking at results-based management. We're looking also at resource mobilization, people management. We talk about the mindset, change of the mindset, but Rami talk about this, government, the change, from being a bureaucracy into challenging themselves. Also, we're looking at financial performance and the group, as an IDB group, the synergy. So you have to establish baseline targets, and then in 2035, where are you? And you have to challenge yourself. Of course, there will be monitoring in the delivery, etc. Next. Next, please. Okay. Now, without getting into the details, in the Islamic Development Bank, again, we're covering all sectors when it comes to human development, human education, health, then agriculture, infrastructure, transport, energy. All of these sectors are part and parcel of our, I would say, delivery to the member countries. However, now, we have to also establish targets on the results. It's not only about approving 10 million road project. It's not about only building a substation. It's not only about just an agriculture project. Who are we serving? So, for example, the slide in front of you, in 2016, our planned results of project to be approved in 2016 is to serve 7.6 million to benefit from the IDB financing. And that's our target at the end of the day. So, for example, in agriculture, we have to establish these targets, and then we have to aim to achieving them. For example, we're looking at 17,400 hectares of area to be irrigated under our project. So it is really a measurable, let's say, goal or target. When you're talking about energy, you're looking at also kind of like the generation of energy that we're looking into our project. It's not only about $200 million or $300 million. It's about how many megawatts are we achieving? How many transmission lines, or the length of the transmission line that we're achieving? How many villages are we serving, etc. And the story goes on for education. How many new classrooms? How many teachers that you'll be training, etc. When you're looking at transportation, again, how many kilometers of road? How many rural roads, kilometers are you going to be achieving? So these are all measurable results. So it's not only just about approving a road project. You have to go into these specific results. Next, please. Same thing, again, that shows that even in our annual work program or the country work program, we're also aligning to the SDGs. So again, we're looking, for example, a certain percentage in our project will be achieving the goal 2, which is hunger, which you're talking about food security, agriculture development, etc. Goal 4, a certain percentage that goes into education, etc., etc. So again, there is alignment between the SDGs and even the work program that we're doing in IDB. Next, please. This slide should have come out before that one, but again, talking about 2017, the current year, same thing that we did in 2016. Again, we're looking into each sector or subsector, what are the targets that we're supposed to be achieving. We're talking about our operation plan in the public sector is about 5.2 billion this year. So what are we translating with this 5.2 on the ground when it comes to agriculture development, into human development, education, transport, etc. Next. Now, last but not least, what are the tools? Okay, again, we talked about the policy, the plan, the goals, the targets, measurable results, etc., etc. But now, how are we going to achieve? What are the tools? Because at the end of the day, you have to have enablers and resources. So as most of you are aware, we're looking at a basket of, I would say, tools or, I would say, resources for the IDB group. So we're looking into project financing. This is for our projects through different modes of financing, whether it's grants, soft loans, OCR, etc. We're looking into our special assistant that's serving our non-member countries through in scholarships or special assistance. We're looking into trade facilitation through ITFC, our entity, capacity development and technical cooperation. We have many, many programs to achieve this one, the reverse linkage, women in development, renewable energy, etc., etc. We're looking at insurance through ISIC, science and technology programs, scholarship program, as I mentioned, funds and asset management, Islamic economy by developing the Islamic, Islamic financing economy and development of new tools, and private sector development and trade, as I mentioned. Now, in conclusion, last slide, please. To draw lessons is, again, since we're talking about serving our member countries, for the member countries to achieve concrete results, we must improve people, to improve the people's lives, there must be strong leadership. And I think this has been mentioned by the previous speaker, the strong leadership to drive the transformation. There should be also clear strategic vision and priorities, key programs which are prioritized, as well as building the culture and the capacity of the institution to deliver. If you don't have it, you cannot deliver. So you have to start with yourself. And that's the reason that IDB for itself to develop to the member countries, it has to develop ourselves and to strengthen our capacity. Second, translating government and organization priorities into delivery and are essential to ensure achieving improved outcomes. Again, we're talking about delivery, and that's the topic of our meeting in here, is effective delivery and monitoring and evaluation. The starting point for an effective transformation program is to have a political will. And here we're talking about leadership and focus and vision. So the political will at the highest level should be there, combined with a set of clear, measurable, prioritized goals. And what I've shared with you is clear goals with measurable, whether it's a kilometer, whether it's a megawatt, with the number of people to be targeted, and a culture that promotes delivery, productivity, and accountability. And with better monitoring and delivery system at the member countries level, we will greatly, as IDB, assist in achieving the objective of well-being of the population of the member country. And finally, using all available tools, whether you have it or again with your partners, you have to go for resource mobilization, to support our member countries in developing an effective system to observe the implementation of the vision programs for these countries, including the transformation. We have the example of Saudi Arabia and other member countries. Again, with that, I just try to share with you the IDB approach when it comes to transformation. Thank you very much.
Now, thank you, Mr. Mohammed, for that very insightful presentation. Now, our last speaker for the afternoon, before we open up the floor for some Q&As, I'd like to invite him to the stage. He's the CEO of the Performance Management and Delivery Unit, known as Pemandu, based out of Malaysia. They are also the ones who run the Global Transformation Forum, which I was very honored to attend this particular year, bringing leaders from all around the world. Let's give him, please, a very big warm welcome. Idris Yalla, please, to the stage.
Thank you. In September 2009, I got a call from the Prime Minister. I was happily working in the private sector then. He said, Idris, would you come and join me? I'm forming a new cabinet. I want you to become the minister in charge of national transformation. So I joined the team at that time in September 2009. This was a conversation in his office. He said, you know, Idris, most governments have great strategies and plans. But the problem is that most of them fail to deliver on their promises because of poor implementation. Because we all copy from one another. We've gone to another country, copied them, and we learn from IDB, we learn from World Bank, and we delete the name of that country and put ours there. They look very similar. Very, very similar. And so that was the discussion. We have in 2020 that by the year 2020, Malaysia wants to become a high-income economy that's inclusive, that's sustainable, that together we have quality of life. That's really what we want. But the problem was we grew rapidly from a low income to middle income to high income. But we got stuck in the middle income trap, in that we were stagnating for nearly about 10 years. And that was the problem. Next slide, please. This is the how, and I want to cover really the gist of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon centers around this one chart. Lee Sandals talked about the planning and thinking 10%, exactly the same numbers we have. Implementation should be 90%, very similar. But let me talk about what we do in bringing a new way of working to get the government to perform better. Call it the 8-step process. The first step was to get the whole cabinet, including the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and the whole cabinet. We got them locked in 5 weekend retreats to discuss strategic direction, priorities, the term that was used before. If you tell them, why do you need the whole day to do this? That's what they will say. They say the plans, the priorities are all clear in the 5-year program. But I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, if the government tell you that, if you look at their annual budget, can almost guarantee their annual budget do not reflect those priorities. And if you say to them, those are the 6 priorities, we're going to take money from the low priority areas and mobilize them, as you said, resource mobilization to the priority areas, then all hell break loose. Then they said, no, I don't mean those as real priorities. So we had a long discussion on that. It was a long time we had to get to get public opinion. This is not very good. It's okay. So we had to get the public to come and do a survey to say what is the pain points. So after we finished doing that, we identified the key priorities. Then we ran labs, like Dr. Rami said. We locked a lot of people in the rooms. And so the labs, when we started the first round of labs in the year 2010, that was remember the World Cup? 8 weeks, we locked 500 people in 12 rooms, and we told them the motto of the labs is Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. You stay there until you find solutions. What we found among all the beautiful strategies and plans of most governments, the problem is they are good, but they are only high level. They are at best 30,000 feet, very high level. They not drill down to detailed level of specificities at what we call 3 feet. That is the problem. So if you want to build a house, you cannot build a house by saying, I want to build a house, start building it now. This house only has 5 rooms, 6 toilets, 1 living room. But that's not how you build a house. You need to be very precise about the detailed design. That's what is missing in all government plans, because there are at 30,000 feet. When we run the labs, we cause people to stay in the labs because we want them to be very detailed about what we need to do. And that's very, very important. That's why they stay there for 8 weeks. When we finish that step 2, what we require is every discussion and detailed recommendations of the lab must be subjected to public scrutiny in full through what we call the open day. The whole public can come. Opposition party leaders, teachers, students, priests, taxi drivers, name it. They come there and look at exactly what you intend to do. And if they don't like it, they'll tell you, we don't like this. And they say, we like this, but that we like you to modify. This is the point about getting public feedback. And this is a very frightening thing for most governments, because government like to do things in a smoke-filled room, and you announce by decree only the gist of what you intend to do, not the details. For example, we said we will build a very big oil and gas hub in Johor. When we were going to do it, we have to tell the public there are 3,000 graves that we have to relocate. 3,000, eh? 932 homes have to be relocated. You've got to tell them. But then you have to tell the public, how are you going to do it in a way that they are okay with it? Very important. After you finish that roadmap, step 2, then you need to move to step 4. publish in detail a roadmap. See, most government documents is full of words. For example, like the SDG, reduce poverty. That's a very big word, to bring it down to zero. What we say is that this year, there are 44,653 families that are in hardcore poor. In that 1 year, we're going to lift them out from absolute poverty. If you say you're going to plant 10,000 trees to green Kuala Lumpur, you should say 10,000 trees. You cannot say many trees. You have to be very specific about it. And then if you say it's 10,000 trees, the mayor of Kuala Lumpur will make sure it happens. And this is how many he's going to plant every year. And that is what we put there. Why did we document it so detailed? Very simple. Because if it's a normal government document that's full of words, it's a place to hide. When it's detailed, the government becomes completely pregnant. When you're pregnant, there's only one consequence you have to deliver. And this is the most frightening document that the government had to ever publish in Malaysia, because we published a document with such excruciating detail. The Prime Minister said, when we publish this, either I execute or I get executed. That was the word he used. Because this is a going for broke. If you don't do it, you're really in trouble, because the public will hold you accountable. So that's step 1, 2, and 3, and 4 is the thinking and the planning. All of that, all together, the 1, 2, and 3, it took us only 3 months. So from 5, 6, 7, 8, we've been implementing all together for 7 years now. What we took 3 months to do, altogether we've been implementing all of these for the last 7 years, every single day. That is what we mean by, actually it's less than 10%, it's 5% probably. So what do we do? Step 5. Once you have published the detailed documents, all the ministers will now get the KPIs that were put by the labs, that is the roadmap, and they're given to them at the beginning of each year, including the permanent secretaries. So they receive the KPI. So if you're the tourism minister, we had a lab on tourism. Every recommendation inside the lab will now become the KPI for the tourism minister and the permanent secretaries. They can't game it, because it was not KPI that they set. It was a KPI that was set by the private sector and the government, etc. Everybody inside the lab. There was sufficient ambition, if you like, in there. Step 6. This is the biggest thing called implementation. We call it DMS implementation. Do it relentlessly, monitor it continuously, solve problem recursively. The word recursive is very similar to Lee Sanders' point about don't spend too long a time on the plan, have it good enough, but then on the basis of your work, as you implement the plan and the policy, you have to come back and make changes to the original plan, because things on the ground are very different from when you think about it in planning terms. So we have a weekly dashboard. Every week on a Friday, 5 o'clock every Friday, exactly at 5 o'clock, we have a dashboard for all the activities. So if you have not delivered it for the week, it will be a red color. If you delivered it, it will be green. If you partially delivered it, it's yellow. Why do we send it on Friday? Because we can spoil your weekend if you don't deliver it. I remember the Prime Minister sent a very simple note to one minister, I shall not mention which one. He said, "Dear so-and-so, last week on Friday, this item was red. This week, the same item is red. Now, what are you going to do differently on Monday next week to cause it to be green next Friday?" That was at 6 p.m. on Friday. You know what happened on Saturday? All hell broke loose. Everybody was in the office, in the ministry, to figure out what they're going to do differently. So that's the sort of things that are coming out from a rigorous monitoring to make sure people get down to implement it. So let me talk about the step number 7. You know, the problem with most people, most citizens, they don't believe government data. They think we massage the data. They think there's fake news. all sorts of things they say about our data. So that's why in our case, whatever results that we say we want to pronounce to the public, they need to be validated by, in our case, PwC come and validate the numbers. So if we said we build 5,700 of rural roads, they must validate and say, yes, indeed, the 5,700 rural roads were completed, etc., etc. That's very important. And in their report, annual report, they will say, that is the number, they validated it, they've changed it from the original number if there are changes in there. And finally, the last one, every year, the Prime Minister sits together with the ministers in his office. So we have the Prime Minister there, and the Minister and myself. And that is how we go through the assessment for each Minister's, what is the score. By the way, if you go to Pemandu website, you can see the scores of all the ministers for the last 6 years, every year. You will know who is the highest performing minister, you will the lowest performing minister is there too. You will also know activity, which one they have achieved, which they have not achieved. Because we believe, the public only believe the government if you say you have achieved this, you haven't achieved this. Nobody believes you if you say that you've achieved everything. And that is why we were very honest and transparent about this level of detail and transparency. By the way, the report is very specific. I'm going to cover some specific achievements, only not to talk about what we've done really, but to give you an indication about that this thing actually works. So that's what we said we're going to do. You remember the World Bank says the GNI per capita for high income is, in the year 2010, was 12,276. Our gap to that at the time was 33%. It remained like that for 10 years before. That's why they said, the World Bank said, IMF said Malaysia was stuck in the middle income trap. Since we've been implementing this work, in 5 years, we have actually closed the gap to 15%. So we now are confident that by 2020, we will be able to get to the high income status. You remember I told you about the labs? We locked 500 people in the room over an 8-week period, mainly private sector and government. And the most phenomenal thing that happened there was this. The total committed investment from the private sector for 121 projects during that lab was $406 billion US. Never before in the history of our country have the private sector put such amount of commitment to do it. And so actually in the year 2014, Bloomberg put me in the world among the top 10 most influential policy makers in the world in the year 2010. I asked him, why didn't you put Obama there? And they said, because Obama has authority. He uses authority, but I didn't have authority. They were impressed with the tool that was used, that we managed to get the private sector in the room for 8 weeks, and we got them willingly to come out and commit this $406 billion US. This will give us 3.3 million new jobs and will boost our GNI to the tune of $250 billion US annually. So as a result of that, you look at the growth of a private sector investment before our economic transformation programs. The CAGR growth was 5.5%, and since then it's been more than double, 11% growth. It's a phenomenal growth in the private sector. And the beauty for this was we were able to keep our debt level constant at 55% of GDP. If you Google my name, type on Google Idris Jala and type the word bankrupt, you will see a lot of articles. Because I famously said in 2010, unless Malaysia pursue a transformation process where we will now get the government to reduce its proportionate investment into the economy, but rather get the public sector to do it, we remove our subsidies, unless we do all that stuff, Malaysia will become bankrupt in 2019 because our debt level will reach the same level as Greece. But good news, ladies and gentlemen, as a result of turning around the things we're doing, we were able to keep our debt level exactly the same as it was in 2016. We had a problem of fiscal crisis as well, 2016, 2009. Our fiscal deficit at that time was negative 6.7%. Every single year we've been cutting our fiscal deficit. We realized that we had an option at that time, whether we were going to get rid of it immediately and move to surplus. We could do it in 1 year, no problem. But we didn't want to do it because it would have caused an austerity drive that would lead us to a recession. We wanted our economy to be mildly expansionary, but we didn't want to go through a recession. By the way, we have a law, we have passed a law in Parliament that says Malaysia shall not borrow, the government does not borrow its debt to be greater than 55% of GDP. So it's a self-imposed limitation that we're putting on ourselves. We promised 3.3 million jobs. We've created 1.8 million already now in the first 5 years. Next slide, please. We did quite a lot of things to be inclusive of rural people. I come from a very small village in the jungle of Borneo. I was born in the jungle of Borneo. My ancestors were headhunters, by the way. They used to chop people's head for trophy. I'm okay, by the way. We were inclusive of the rural people, so we built a lot of kilometers of rural roads, and we gave electricity. My own village today now have electricity. And my tribe is so small, there are only 5,000 of my tribe in the whole world. You could put all of us in a zoo. And so we were very conscious that we cannot have a Malaysian economy, a country that reaches high income status, without being inclusive of rural people. So we spent a lot of effort on rural people. Then the second thing, we also spend a lot of effort on the low-income people. We introduced minimum wage to lift 2.9 million people out from poverty line, absolute poverty. We removed the subsidies, fuel subsidies. We then put them into cash transfers, and we gave the money for the targeted poor whose incomes were in the bottom 40%. And we got people to participate in activities that will gainfully get them out from poverty. Altogether, we touched the lives of 7 million people, the poor people. And this shows that the income of the bottom 40% grew at a 12% per annum. Compared to the rest of Malaysia, the average is about 8%. So with consumer price index going on an annual basis of less than 3%, so this is actually very good. We are closing the gap in terms of disparity of income. And so we have an aggregate key performance indicator. In the year 2010, we are 12% ahead of the targets. And 2011, it was 23%. These are validated by the PwC, and the details are in our document. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to say this. We have a journey that is, we found out that we needed to introduce a new way of working. But you know, the problem with most of us, when we look at the vision, you put a very nice vision, very far away. But you know, we only think about that vision. We forget that what we needed to do to get that vision is to deal with the present. And so I think this is a key point I want to say. We are so obsessed, it's so tragic that we're looking at that magical rose garden in the horizon. We forget the roses that are blooming outside our windows. And most clever people in government, I think, suffer from one problem, in my opinion. That is this. Intelligent people seldom go beyond the boundaries of their self-imposed limitation. So I think if we can remove the limitations that we impose on ourselves and step out and entertain an entirely new way of managing the government, then I think we can get better results. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Idris, and that was certainly very inspiring. Can I request all our speakers and our experts please to join me onto the stage to conduct a panel discussion and to open the floor for a Q&A. So Dr. Rami, Lee, Mr. Muhammad, Idris, and Mr. Ahmed, please back to the stage. Now, are we on? Yes. Can we actually have some people with some floating mics, please, around the room so we can actually invite our attendees to actually get their questions. If we can have some floating mics, please, to be around the room. Now, first up, I've got my first question for Lee, in fact. My first question, while you were presenting, I made a lot of notes, but where have you been seeing most of the impact, of course, from the delivery units, and specifically in which particular member country? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of countries who are doing a great job. I mean, as Idris has set out, I think the Pimandu model is a fantastic one. The impact is clear to see. That is a role model to look at. Other places that we're seeing it working are Brunei Darussalam, 2 years in a row, the most improved country for ease of doing business. Quite a small country, unique challenges to do with diversifying the economy, but making great strides on ease of doing business. And then in the Punjab region of Pakistan, fantastic outcomes there in terms of education outcomes and health outcomes for the people. That's in terms of outcomes, but in terms of what I was talking about, the actual how, I think somewhere like Brunei is doing a great job of just day to day. If you went into government today, you'd see people using data. You'd see more focused meetings, focused on implementation, on fast feedback. You'd see government civil servants going out, talking to businesses around what it's like to start a business. So day to day, I think the culture is changing there as well as the outcomes, which is fantastic.
Now, just on the subject of the value proposition for delivery units, why a delivery unit? Because I was doing some research on this. How is it different from the conventional monitoring functions previously?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So my take on a delivery unit is that you actually become delivery experts, not in the policy content. So you don't take over the job of the department or the ministry, but you understand delivery. You actually get out there, you talk to people involved in delivery, and you're more than just monitoring. So you're understanding about delivery, what's making it effective, and you're using that feedback to drive decision making and problem solving. My take on a program management office is that typically it's hard to get beyond just the monitoring of saying this is what's happening. You're not actually getting into the problem solving, the learning, and trying to actually improve delivery.
Okay, good points. Now, does anybody have any questions from the audience? I believe we've got one at the back there. Can we potentially get a microphone? Very good.
Yes, please. I have one general question and one specific to Brother Rami for Vision 2030
Dr.
for Saudi
Rami, yeah.
Arabia. Now, I think two speakers, they have mentioned 10-90 or 90-10, whatever the ratio is. Now, about policy and implementation. My question is, it seems that these policy implementation is only for the public sector. Where is the private sector? Because any transformation program, any vision, and we always say private sector should be basically the engine, the driver for a whole transformation program. So how we fix the KPIs, particularly when there is a delivery unit, where is the private sector sitting in delivery unit and monitoring KPIs? So are there KPIs for the private sector and public sector, and those are monitored? So this is a general question for all three presentations. Now, Vision 2030 was Saudi Arabia. Very detailed vision, very comprehensive. But how this is aligned or linked with the SDGs? Because this is the exact time, 2015-2030, same time for SDGs. So, because at the end, it is not the national targets or KPIs are achieved. Global agenda for next 15 years is SDGs. So basically, the government has to achieve both national KPIs as well as global agenda of SDGs. So how the Vision 2030 is aligned with SDGs? Thank you very much.
Okay, who wants to tackle this particular question? Dr. Rami, do you want to mention?
Okay, so I'm going to address the first question partially, and maybe I will leave the floor for their excellencies or the other presenters. For the private sector, and if I can understand your question correctly, where does it fall into the whole ecosystem? So we actually understand that as of some of the measures that the Saudi Arabia, for example, took, there was some effects on the private sector, and that was addressed actually, and that's why there is an investment or the 200 billion incentives that was basically like announced as part of the fiscal balance program. And it's worth mentioning that actually the delivery unit with other government entities, they are currently running private sector labs on how to incentivize the private sector participation. And it has been running like for the last month, and it's actually still running. And so that's at the part of addressing the private sector, and they are going to come up with initiatives and KPIs, and some of these initiatives will see the light in 2017. So that's the first question. The question on the alignment with the SDGs, first of all, this is not part of what we do at Delivery and Rapid Intervention Center. However, my understanding is this is an exercise being now carried out by the Ministry of Economic and Planning. They're doing this alignment, and it's actually being done at the moment. But I don't have like full visibility on it. But my understanding, and actually heard some discussions on the alignment with the SDGs. So I hope this answers your question.
Jump into
Idris,
there.
yeah.
As I mentioned, we ran the labs in 2010. We got the private sector involved. And there were 131 projects that were agreed. These were private sector, mainly projects. So for example, one particular company wanted to build a St. Regis hotel. So he said he will build a hotel. He's got the money, he's got the license to do it. All he wanted from the government, actually in the lab, was to get the approval. He doesn't need any money from government. Then you have another, the Petronas wanted to build the biggest oil refinery in Pengerang. That's the biggest investment that they're putting in. By the way, now Saudi Aramco is participating in that particular project. That project was born in 2010 in the lab. What they said was they will put the bulk, 90% of the money. The only thing they need from the government was the government allocate 20,000 acres of land and then remove the graves, 3,000 graves. And so that's why it is happening today. We did our part and did this. So every week we monitor the KPIs, Petronas KPI and the St. Regis Hotel, so all the 131 projects. The high-speed rail that is connecting Kuala Lumpur to Singapore was born in the lab as well. So that's a KPI that involved Singapore government and Malaysia government working together. And then there's also a private sector that's helping to build that. And so this tremendous effort is being put and to get this done. We're building the MRT. We have a company called Mass Rapid Transit Company that is there. They also have the KPIs. Every Friday we will know how many stations have been completed, etc., in excruciating detail. So yes, with regards to the SDG, as I said before, a lot of what we're doing for the poor people, for the rural people, they were all part of the SDGs. And we were very conscious of needing to make sure that our work is aligned with the SDGs. In fact, we have a lot more things on women, and I didn't cover a lot of the details on SDGs, on health as well, but I didn't cover them.
Lee, I know you want to comment.
Beyond the deep engagement that Idris is talking about there, the other thing as well about both the delivery units that we've worked in is the actual mix of the talent in the delivery unit actually reflects the different sectors. So Pemandu had a strong sort of private sector talent within the unit. The unit I worked in, where we were more focused on like social outcomes like education and health, we had doctors, nurses, chief execs of hospitals as part of the delivery unit. So you had people who weren't just government, who actually understood the sector where they were delivering the transformation. So there's something about the talent you have within the unit as well can help, as well as the engagement that Idris has set out.
Absolutely. Now, I think there were some more questions at the back there.
Yes, thank you. Very brilliant presentation, and indeed. I'd like to know, during the process of defining what and how is the financial resource factor in the process? Is it iterative? We identify how to do the thing, and then we come back to the cost, and we go back to the drawing table. How was it done in practice? Thank you.
Let me answer that one quickly. In the case of Malaysia, during the 8 weeks lab, the detail must come with a proposal for how much money is required, resources. So it was done there, and we had the Prime Minister coming and the Finance Minister coming inside the lab saying, I agree or don't agree, modify. So by the time the lab is finished, it's signed off. So all the Treasury, Chief Secretary, the Finance Minister, they all sign it off. By the time we finished the lab, it was completely approved in full detail by the whole government.
Mr. Mohammed, did you want to comment on that in terms of budgeting?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, when it comes to IDB, as I said, that the resources of the bank is drop in the ocean when it comes to the needs of the member countries. Here you have to rely not only on your internal resources, but also on external resources. So again, some tools like off-balance sheet financing, leveraging. I can give examples. For example, we have established a fund. We call it the Life and Livelihood Fund in cooperation with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the King Salman Center in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi Fund, and Qatar Fund. And the idea started with the needs of our member countries when it comes to social services like health and education. They require very, very concessional resources, either grants or soft loans, which the bank does not have, unfortunately. So the idea is we were able to bring those partners with us to establish this fund. The idea simply is about 500 million grants coming from the donors, and we leverage it or we complement it with about $2 billion of our resources. So when you do the blending, the financing, the 2.5 facility, will be available to the member countries in these very essential services such as health, agriculture development, productivity, rural development, at very, very concessional resources. So the example is about resource mobilization, thinking out of the box. Of course, there are many, many areas and activities when it comes to the financial resources.
Fantastic. I know that, Lee, you assist many countries, of course, do on the delivery units. How is that usually arranged in regards to, and just to answer basically more of the question, how do usually many countries plan and budget for the costings?
I think as Idris said, it's really key that from the outset you have the budget allocated, aligned with the plan. But the key thing, as Idris said, it's done quickly. So it's not you do the lab and then you have to go through a budget agreement process for another 6 months before you get going. It's done quickly in parallel, so you're ready to go. So that's the key thing, pace, urgency. The other thing that we've learned is that if you get this whole approach to transformation right, it's really key for future budget rounds, because if you can go into a budget negotiation saying, here is our plan, this is what we implemented, this is what we learnt about it, here's the evidence of impact, this is how much we've improved outcomes, you're in a much better position to secure your budget for future investment than some of the ministries who are sat there saying, well, we've got this idea, but we don't actually have any data on impact, or we're not quite sure what it's going to achieve for our citizens. So if you set this up well, it makes budget negotiations and allocation much easier and more effective in the future.
Great comments. Further questions? Yep. Rashak?
Thank you for very enlightening presentations. My two quick questions. One is, how different is it, the delivery unit from the national planning commissions? Generally, a lot of countries and governments have planning commissions. What is the coordination there? And the second question is it on those 8 stages that the Excellency from Malaysia talked about, do you see that there is sometimes a challenge in setting up the KPIs itself? Because that model we use in our own organization, and I think where we go wrong is setting up unrealistic KPIs because the board is asking something. So how do you manage that in setting up KPIs in the most appropriate and the right way?
Let me deal with the last question. How do we manage the various stakeholders in setting the KPIs? When we sit down in the lab for 6 to 8 weeks full time, during the lab we bring in all the necessary key stakeholders. If you to use the term, the board needs to come there, the Prime Minister needs to be there. They all collectively come and we do it. But what you don't want them to do is to put very, very low targets, KPIs. That's what most people want to do. The inside there, you want it to be very stretched, but you don't want it to be totally impossible to the point that people think you're crazy. You can be mad, but not crazy. And I think what you need to do is stretch it. But if you ask the question, if you put the target so high, do you ask the question, how in the recommendation of the lab will it be achieved? What exactly are you going to do to make sure that will be achieved? And by the way, when we had our crime, this was really, it was scary. Crime was rising in Malaysia, particularly street crime, for 4 years running. Then we had a lab on crime. And when we put the target to reduce street crime by 20%, everybody said it was a crazy target. There's no way you could achieve a 20% reduction in 1 year. But when we look at how they did in NYPD, New York Police, what they did in the UK, it was possible to do. But the question, how did they do it? Identify the hotspot, crime hotspot, put the police there without even training them. If the crime was happening there, usually at 7 p.m., you put the police there. If you tell the policeman, if you don't like the government, you're lazy, it's okay, but starting tomorrow, you stand there. And when we did that, actually street crime in the first year fell by 40%.
Well,
So you'd think it is a really crazy number, but that's really what it was. But you got to look at exactly what are the methods to cause street crime to drop. But you must be prepared to deploy the police. In fact, the total number of police that we had to redeploy for the crime hotspots never happened before, 29,000 police. So you have to get the police from other areas and redeploy them into the 75 key hotspot areas that we felt
again,
that
it comes back to the implementation.
Yeah.
Right.
Implementation.
Dr. Ahmed?
I think your question was about how delivery unit is different from the planning ministry activities. The planning ministries, were conceived from a socialist model of development in the 50s and 60s. And the traditional planning ministries typically had lots of economists and, sector specialists working in input-output kind of coefficients and, undertaking more like bureaucratic but directed planning goals or development goals for the public sector and the private sector. And the resource mobilization and the credit allocation from the banking system was organized in a manner to achieve those development goals. Now, from what we have listened this afternoon, and also, the activities of the delivery units of, some governments in Africa, particularly Senegal, this framework of delivery unit is much more transparent, accountable, and open to public scrutiny. And it has, the process is very inclusive, which was not the case in the traditional planning model. So I think, this is, big difference, but two conceptual differences.
Yes, we have a question at the front here. Can we get the microphone? Great.
Thank you to the panel. I have two questions. In the case of Malaysia, I tend to discern at least two winning ingredients in the success so far. One seems to be a very supportive culture, and the other seems to be discipline. Am I right in concluding then that without these two, there's more likelihood of failure of your planning framework than success? Because if that's the case, then I'm worried, particularly coming from a Caribbean setting, where the culture may not be as supportive, nor the discipline that you speak about, and what that portends for our development, particularly small island states with an abundance of challenges. The second one is this business of the deliverable unit. It's new to me. I was first introduced to it earlier this year at the IDB workshop. I'm not convinced about it because it seems to transfer responsibilities from ministries to some super unit. And that has its real problems as I could see it. I don't know what's the success rate of it so far. I'm not going to sell it down the line as yet. But to me, I much prefer that we work more on getting those ministries for which people were elected and leaders become more responsible to getting those units working rather than superimposing another major unit, most likely out of the Prime Minister's office or the President's office, who will be looking down like lords onto the little serfs and minions. so to speak. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to throw it off to Lee first to answer the question on the delivery unit. Yep.
So if a delivery unit behaves as you articulated there, it will definitely fail. So if a delivery unit is a super unit that takes over the delivery from an agency, it will definitely fail. That is not what we mean when we talk about delivery. When we talk about delivery, we're talking about exactly what you said, which is how do you build the capacity of ministries to be better at delivery themselves? So delivery units in our mind that are effective are not super units. They don't take over the job of individual ministries or departments. They enable them through the things we've talked about today. They help them. They're supportive. They work in partnership with them. Those units succeed. The ones who take over the job, they fail. And you'll see around the world stories of units that have succeeded, units that have failed. The ones that fail get the culture, the behavior wrong. They get the partnership wrong with the individual departments.
Do you want to provide Australia? You were providing Australia for me as an example, just outside as we were speaking. Do you want to provide that as an example?
Yeah, so New South Wales in Australia is a really good example of, historically, they've had lots of failed delivery units. And they've typically failed because they've either been like a policing unit who just goes around checking up on people and they don't add much value, or because they have been sort of policing the departments and therefore they've got the relationships wrong. The current delivery unit in New South Wales has recently gone through a transition between a change in Premier. And the reason that it survived that change in Premier is because everyone said there is deep commitment, there is partnership working, everyone's working together to improve the delivery of the whole of government. So getting the relationships right, getting the partnerships right, the delivery unit being seen as its value proposition of helping departments get better at delivery, helping to build their capacity, that's what we think succeeds in terms of delivery units.
Fantastic. Idris?
Yeah, the question on culture. And my view is that this work is cultural. It's not dependent on the culture. Because in Malaysia, this is exactly when we first came out with this idea of doing the 8 step. That was the first thing that everybody said, it cannot work in Malaysia. Because this is an idea that comes from the private sector. It will never work in government. That was the comment that everybody put. And the same idea, when this idea was introduced in Tanzania, it was exactly the same. Accepted it, okay. The same thing they said in Oman, when they introduced under what's called the 10 feed program in Oman. They also follow the 8-step process. And it's okay. In fact, I was in Caribbean talking to Mike Iman and about this idea of doing a similar thing. And I think the conclusion was he also thinks it can be done if you really want to do it. It requires the top leadership. I cannot underemphasize the importance that we have said across the panel here, the importance of top leadership. So if you get that ingredient correct, the top leadership agreeing to the collective, then you get the whole government to begin to act differently. Then the cultural change, the action, the doing will change the being. The cultural change will happen over time, but it will happen over time. But what you don't want to go through is go through a full process of changing culture. No, we're changing the way they do things. So over time, the cultural change will come as a byproduct.
It's a good comment. Mr. Mohammed?
Thank you. First, I would like to acknowledge His Excellency Finance Minister from Guyana, Mr. Winston Jordan. Thanks for the question. Let me look at it from the bank point, although I'm not in a position to judge about the effectiveness of the delivery unit or not. But one essential point I want to mention is this issue about data gathering. The delivery units being a monitoring tool, not to take the job of the actual delivery, which is done by the functional units, whether the ministries or the departments or all that. I think it has been in IDB because we established a delivery unit attached to the president of the bank, whereby today, without speaking on behalf of the colleagues, but the president has a dashboard where the president can monitor really the performance of all functioning units of the department. And even KPIs are developed, cascaded either up, down, or down, up, from the staff level, department level, up to the vice president, where we have covenants of the vice president, and a contract with the president on the delivery on these, I would say, parameters or the KPIs and all of that. So the point I want to make is it's effective from a data gathering, because data is very, very important. Sometimes it's scattered, it's not accurate, it's not updated and all of that. So this is maybe one positive element of having a delivery unit attached to the leadership, where data accuracy and monitoring and accurate monitoring. Thank you.
Very good. Did that answer your question? Okay. We have a question here on my right.
Thank you. I think I'll follow up what Prasati said about the quality of data, especially in the how. And perhaps I would like to bring in a new point of perhaps it's more important the why. Because definitely with an inspirational why, perhaps you can focus the people more than the difficulties in creating weekly targets. Especially like, for example, if we go out for a vision like JFK is putting a man on the moon. Now, to break that vision into weekly targets, especially if we are going for innovation, it's very difficult. And especially the point that was brought up, that it also sometimes creates hurdles, because to break down such a vision, and especially given the process of innovation where you need a critical mass, it's a messy, which cannot be broken down into weekly targets, and there you create an adverse incentive to misreport the progress made, and in fact you create an Enron-like situation where you continue to push data under the rug until the situation implodes or explodes. So if the panel can allude on or explore that point. Thank you.
Dr. Rami?
I would like actually to direct this question to the experts. Yes.
Okay.
So I mean, first of all, targets, like any policy, any delivery unit, you get good targets, you get bad targets, okay? So that's the first thing. I gave you an example of a bad target, which was the unauthorized absence. That should have been a target just around improving attendance. So let's not kid ourselves, okay? You get good targets, you get bad targets. But the point is that if you have a vision, that may inspire people, that may, excite people. But at some point, someone's going to ask you whether you've achieved it. So you do have to be able to measure it in some way. And then visions are often, as we've said, quite high, high-level statements. You then do need to be able to break it down. So this is just a reality of you are going to have to be able to measure it in some way to answer the question, have you achieved your vision? Whether it's then weekly, monthly, some targets are measured daily. If you're working on tackling street crime in a police force, you're probably setting yourself daily targets. If you're working in a hospital, improving access to healthcare in your emergency department, you're probably monitoring hourly targets. So it will vary depending on the nature of the goal. But I think the principles are, you get good targets, bad targets, you plan for them, but the key is learn from them, correct them. Don't just keep going with a bad target, try and make it better. When you set a vision, you've got to be able to measure it in some way to be able to say whether you've achieved it, and that will look different depending on the vision itself.
Absolutely.
If just I want to add to that, I totally agree with Lee here. In the World Bank wrote a case study on the Malaysian Pemandu model, and just released last week, 2 weeks ago in Washington. In their appendix, they put the number of targets that we report out on a weekly basis, 277. Then they put a metrics there. I never counted it, but they counted, the World Bank. And they cost, in a weekly report, they said, these are the targets that Pemandu monitor on a weekly basis. These are the targets that come out on a monthly basis. These are quarterly basis. This is annual basis. Because, for example, exams, school exam, you don't put people through public exams every day, every week. But the dashboard will say the annual targets is once a year, the exam. But there are targets that are monitored on a weekly basis. But nonetheless, it's always there. So it's noted in our reports, which are weekly, which are daily, which are on quarterly basis and annually. So I do agree that there's some good targets. But I think in the act of doing it, you have to keep on being recursive. Sometimes the departments also game the system. They put very low target, and some of them, they achieve the 3-year target in the first year. But they can game you 1 year, but you then take their high performance and they then say 30% on top of that. Then you will see stretch targets.
Dr. Ahmed, did you want to comment on on this
I
question?
think my panelist colleagues have
Yep.
more or less answered what I was going to say. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I had some comments here in terms of the ingredients of a successful delivery, what makes or breaks a delivery unit. And of course, I've got here proper planning, quality implementation, accountability, and transparency. Is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Well, Idris reminded, he made the point, we've all been talking about leadership. I mean, that leadership, the commitment to change is key. And I think one thing that I've learned is that it's great if you've got a single leader who's driving the agenda. It's even better if you can build that out into a coalition, a group of leaders, because as we know, a lot of transformation is sometimes vulnerable to that one leader changing. And obviously you want transformation to live beyond a change in leadership. So the idea of a coalition of leaders throughout your whole of your sector really committed to the plan, that with focus for me are the key ingredients.
Fantastic. Well done. I think we've got a question here on my left.
Nitschke from the German Development Corporation. I'm very impressed by
Welcome.
the presentations. And out of 20 years of change processes, transformation, we learned a lot, a great deal in how to transform the public sector. And you touched upon it with a business model, with good criteria, the 8 steps. I loved all that. What I missed was a bit like the motivation aspect. Especially in public sector, we learned a lot about incentive systems. We know that we need rules and regulations, accountability, but we also need incentive systems. And in a lot of public sectors around the world in governance, we don't have these incentive systems, but we have sometimes pretty patriarchal seniority principles that do not really match with these key KPIs. So maybe it's 2 or 3 words on your experience, Malaysian case, other cases from the ISDB. Thank you for inviting us today on how to incentivize change. Thank you.
If I may talk about the Malaysian model, I totally agree with you that in our case, that's a deficiency. We didn't address it for a simple reason that at that time, we didn't want to introduce that, nor did we have the appetite at that point in time to begin a punitive consequence management process. And there's a culture, to use your word, in the government. You don't sack civil servants if they don't deliver. But we have what we call cold storage. You call it temporary parking. If you are not doing a very good job, they don't sack you, put you in a job that's a non-job. Even permanent secretaries have been put into a temporary parking environment. But more importantly, despite the fact we had not quite addressed the incentive models, if you make it transparent to public who is performing and not performing, that in itself is a very, very, very important thing that causes a change in behavior. In the case of Malaysia, the Prime Minister, I know he used it in his choice who are the cabinet ministers. So when he had to change the cabinet, half of the cabinet ministers were changed at the last election. I'm sure he actually used the performance as one criteria. He also used the political aspect of it because it's a coalition government. So, but he does use that in parts to say that this is serious business. So in our case, if we had it up my way, we would wanted to introduce much better incentives like in the government, in the private sector to do it. But perhaps it's the next thing that we will do.
Dr. Ahmed, how do we incentivize results?
Yes, I think this is a topic which I'm very fond of thinking and discussing. And in my observations, I think it's a mistake to believe that the public sector should imitate private sector speed, because the two have a completely different mandate. Obviously, the public sector is entrusted with public resources, taxes. And if you try to bring in private sector processes, it's a recipe for corruption, as simple as that. The degree of monitoring and the way the public sector must function should be through a very thorough, deliberative process and slower than the private sector. Only then I think we can, in my view, we can have proper safeguarding of public resources. So I think imitating private sector practices, I've observed whenever within a government overall function. If there is one or two ministries which are acting like board of investments in many countries, they function like private sector entities, but you see a lot of irregular outcomes, scandals, which is actually wastage of resources, and it creates bad image for the government. So that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Mohammed?
From the IDB perspective, and again, thanks a lot for all of you really to attend our annual meeting. Really, we're very, very glad to have you all with us. From the IDB, aside from this issue of accountability, okay, because now it's not a matter of just only business as usual, it's really about accountability. So when you're talking about incentives, I can just maybe tell you 2 or 3 things, looking at it. Number one is this issue about staff or department performance management system, because again, you achieve definitely the performance, you will be rewarded one way or the other, okay, at the staff level, at the department level, etc. Number 2, we're talking about nowadays about limited resources, very limited resources. So although I'm not a financial person, but when you're talking about administrative budget or budget for a department or the bank, every department or every complex is competing, for travel budget, consultancy budget, and all of that. So here is another, again, incentive for if you perform, if you achieve your KPIs within the allotted time, definitely you will be more entitled for more resources vis-a-vis people who don't deliver, and therefore they will be prevented from. So this is just as from an administrative point of view. Thanks.
Dr. Rami?
I'd like to comment. Yes. I would like to comment on this because actually this is one of the issues that we identified through our experience in the last year is motivation and the morale of the public servants or the government employees. And actually there are some things that we learned, like I told you about some of the training programs like ADA is doing. Actually this is boost a lot of the morale in the government employees. But there are some small things, like we as a delivery unit, like even addressing the previous question on what's the difference between like the planning commission or the delivery unit, sometimes it just provides an engagement platform. And just the idea of being part of this change and being engaged is by itself a motivational aspect and element. Another thing is sometimes small things such as like meeting with the minister, like having the team or the government employees who are working on an initiative or working on a project, and then they have been meeting with the minister or having like a speech with him. These small things have a big impact. But addressing like the incentives, if we're talking about financial incentives or awards or some sort of things, we are studying some of these things, but I still am sticking with the some of like I would say the not financial part, okay? Some of that's connecting to the motivation and being part of the vision. I think that plays a big role.
Yep, definitely. Some great questions coming through from our attendees. I believe we've got one on my right here from our female attendee.
Thank you. I find it quite depressing that we speak in terms of public sector and private sector without really addressing a deeper motivation, and Dr. Rami just mentioned this, is, there's some values that are intrinsic to Muslim communities. And so, for instance, hospitality is one of them, family is another one, loyalty is a third. We're not really thinking about national or regional or village level transformation in any of those terms. So that kind of values-driven incentivization, implementation, planning, design, delivery, monitoring, evaluation, is there literature on this? Are people thinking about this? Is this wishful thinking?
I think Mr. Mohammed, you want to respond?
Although I'm not an expert in here, but I can just maybe, something comes to my mind. إن خير من استأجرت القوي الأمين. Sorry for, and this is Arabic, okay. But what it means, okay, it talks about strength and amana. And strength is really about ability to deliver. So here is inspiration about, hiring the right person for the right job. So again, this is about delivery. And amana is, again, it's about honesty, it's about perfection. إن الله يحب إذا عمل أحدكم عملا أن يتقنه. So again, there is what you call productivity, accuracy, etc. So yes, in the Islamic literature, there is this issue about the effective delivery, accountability. It is there. I'm not an expert in Sharia also, but these are two things that come to my mind, which is embedded in our Sharia, in Quran, in Sunnah, and all of that.
Lee?
And in Brunei, they've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and they sort of present a slide which has delivery plus Islamic leadership equals the Brunei way, and they're trying to look at how 3 core value sets within Islam fit with what we're talking about in terms of delivery, and they're defining it as their way. And they actually run a leadership program which blends Islamic leadership alongside what we're talking about here, delivering results to show how it can be done in their way of government. So, and a lot of it is just emphasize. I spoke about behaviors. They'll really emphasize the values in terms of honesty and so on, in terms of they'll really emphasize those in the way that you lead and the way that you do it. So I probably haven't done enough justice to that, but I think they're really strong on making sure those values are embedded in leaders in the way they talk about delivering results.
If I may, I want to add.
Idris, yeah?
Yeah, we had some real challenges in Malaysia in 2010 when we talked about us being a very plural society, and there's quite a lot of divisions within the various races within Malaysia. So we came up with this idea of one Malaysia. So we actually ran a lab on it. Would you believe it was a 6 weeks labs to figure out what can we do to make us a lot more united. Then in the lab we defined that the values, the way that we looked at one another was the lowest level of what we call we tolerate one another. I don't particularly like you, but I tolerate you. You have different religion, different ethnic group, I tolerate. So if you are in the tolerating zone, we're inviting them to move into the acceptance mode, which is level 2. And then if you're already in level 2, we're asking the Malaysians to move to celebrating mode. That means looking at the diversity, the differences in religion, to say, I like this part of your religion. I like this part of what you do in your ethnic group. And so why don't I want to embrace that? So really what we were trying to do is so that we don't get cocooned in our own plural way of looking at things, but rather seeing how do we celebrate our diversity, because it's a huge cultural challenge in Malaysia. So we introduced the One Malaysia idea and concept moving forward. But you know, cultural change is a very difficult thing. It will take a long time for these things to really happen. It will take a lot of courage for people to stand for to celebrate our differences rather than to scorn the differences. And so dealing with the minorities on the fringes is a challenge for us, making sure that the silent majority speak out much more robustly against the extremes in our society.
Very good comments. Dr. Rami?
I just want to add to that. In our center, we actually conducted a workshop to talk about values. And this should affect, because like our capital is our people. Like the people who are working in the delivery unit or the delivery center is our capital. So the values actually plays a big role in what are the things that we hire based upon. Because when we deal with entities or other government agencies, it's all about the quality of the relationship you have. So if you go, like, as Lee Sanders said, like in the Australian model, like if you are a police, or people will not cooperate with you, they will not deliver. And so actually, like some of the values that came up in that workshop is, of course, passion to deliver and all of that, delivery focus. But some of the other things is humility, like just having humility, reliability, very close relationship. You know what I mean? Like these small, subtle things actually do have a great value. So
go a long way. Now I'm going to leave with my final question. I think this is going to be directed to many of the experts here, but we haven't covered this one. What is the future of delivery management? What does the future look like? Lee?
Yes, so it's a really good question. So I think certainly what we're seeing now is delivery being applied in a whole variety of different contexts, which shows how can you adapt it to make it work in different governance setups and so on, but also for more complicated goals. So in Australia, we're working on a goal to try and tackle reductions in domestic violence. which is a big problem in Australia. Now, you can move from building roads to improving waiting times in hospitals, but trying to tackle something like domestic violence, where it's deeply cultural, behavioural, goes back generations, deep-rooted in society. So I think we're stretching it there. So I think that we're going into uncharted territories. But also I think the big thing, and this is happening around the world, is like data, citizen engagement. So if you look at data and how that's used to drive decision making, but also the equivalent of customer feedback. So how citizens respond to how they feel about public services, how you capture that in the way that you would in the private sector if you bought anything today on Amazon or whatever. I think that whole data, customer feedback, real time, fast feedback loops to learn, I think is the way forward for delivery, to do the sort of iteration and the constant refinement that we've all spoken about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Idris?
Future of delivery units. In my opinion, if you can successfully introduce the new way of working, which I tried to capture in the 8 steps, if that capability, the new way of working, already exists within the civil service, there is no need for the delivery unit, in my opinion. And so we spent 7 years trying to inculcate, institutionalize this new way of working. And so we felt that already now the time is up. So my team was deleted. We made ourselves redundant on the 1st of March because we felt that the public sector already had institutionalized the 8-step ways of doing it. If you like, they've already internalized it, mainstream it. So then future, when you become successful, then I think the delivery unit becomes redundant, in my opinion.
Okay, Dr. Rami, future delivery management?
Well, I would say that each country has its own context, and every context is different. So, and actually, over the last decade, there is a lot of delivery units. Some of them succeeded, some of them failed. And from each, I would say, from each of these cases, we should learn and what worked and what didn't work. And then every country should have its own. For example, in our case in Saudi Arabia, monitoring is not part of the delivery unit, whereas in Malaysia and in the UK, they were actually combining these 2 functions. So they were actually monitoring and delivering at the same time, whereas we have a separate entity who is basically responsible for monitoring the performance of the entities. So we'll see. We're still in the journey, so we'll see how it goes.
We'll see what the future looks like. Mr. Mohammed, what are your thoughts?
Good. 2 points. Number one, I think involvement of all stakeholders has to be a must. It's not only about the delivery unit and the delivering, I would say, mechanism. It's also, at the end of the day, who are the beneficiaries? They have to be part and parcel of the success of a delivery system and all of that. Now, from an IDB perspective, again, we talked about the SDGs, we talked about the delivery and all of that. It is our mandate to provide capacity to our member countries. We talked about limited capacity in member countries, weaknesses, etc. So you cannot just talk about it without really delivering capacity, building institution capacity, and sharing your success and all with the member countries.
Fantastic. Yeah, Dr. Ahmed?
Yes, I think, delivery unit business should not, appears to be a little bit of a management fad. The theme of our session is achieving country vision through effective transformation programs. So the key is the transformation programs, which we, the economists, want to call it reform agenda, reform program. And I think, the entire human journey has been about reforms. We have evolved from, hunters to present day. So, it's not a panacea for all the problems of the world, of all the societies. I think country vision transformation program is an outcome of history, culture, and there are lots of obstacles. There are regional and global influences which derail or do not, support the transformation program. So it's a very complex journey, complex interactions, and we must struggle to improve the national objectives, the country visions, and certainly delivery unit is a tool, but not the tool. Thank you.
Fantastic. Can I get a big round of applause, please, for each one of our experts? Lee Idris, Dr. Rami Muhammad, and of course, Dr. Ahmed as well. Thank you so much for attending this particular session. I hope you really enjoyed it and got lots of value. Our experts will be available if you do have any one-on-one questions from here on. We hope that you enjoyed this session. We hope you enjoyed the rest, of course, of the annual meeting here in Jeddah. So thank you so much and have safe travels home. Thank you.